All right, so good morning, and our devotional this morning uh, highlighted one of the passages in Exodus chapter 32, and I'll read verses 9 through 14 for you. And again, if you are wanting to follow this devotional journey with us, you can find all the info on the website, allthingsnew.church. Click on the devotional Zoom Hangout link, and then there's also a link down there to with info on the app, how to download the app and get going, and then join us. And even if you don't want to download the app or just kind of come and hang out on the Zoom, you're always welcome to do that as well. So this is from Exodus chapter 32, starting with verse 9. The Israelites were in the wilderness. Moses had gone to be with the Lord away from the people, and they got stir crazy, and so they go to Aaron and ask Aaron to give them basically, give them a god that they could worship, and so the famous golden calf is created. They start to worship the golden calf, and starting in verse 9, God says, "I have seen these people," the Lord said to Moses, "and they are a stiff-necked people. Now leave me alone so that my anger may burn against them and that I may destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation." But Moses sought the favor of the Lord his God. "Lord," he said, "why should your anger burn against your people whom you brought out of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say it was with evil intent that he brought them out, to kill them in the mountains and to wipe them off the face of the earth? Turn from your fierce anger, relent, and do not bring disaster on your people. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, to whom you swore by your own self, I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give your descendants all this land I promised them, and it will be their inheritance forever." Then the Lord relented and did not bring on his people the disaster he had threatened. Moses turned and went down the mountain with the 2 tablets of the covenant law in his hands. They were inscribed on both sides, front and back. The tablets were the work of God. The writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets. And so he's got these tablets, and he comes down, and Moses sees what's happening with the calf. He gets upset when he approached and saw the dancing with the calf. His anger burned. He threw the tablets out of his hands, broke them to pieces, and he took the calf the people had made and burned it in the fire. Then he ground it to powder, scattered it on the water, and made the Israelites drink it. So for whatever reason, this passage, instead of the others, sort of stood out to me this morning. And again, like the way that I'm reading through this devotional app each morning is just trying to read it with the kind of posture of Lectio Divina. Just if a passage or a phrase or something sort of sticks out to me, I just try to sit with that and dwell on it for a moment and trust that God might be trying to say something through that. And I thought it was interesting this morning with this passage alone, this idea of God getting so upset and saying, "That's it, I'm going to destroy them." And if you notice, he says, "I'm going to destroy them, and then I'm going to make you into a great nation," to Moses. And of course, that's what he had said to Abram. He says, "Go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation." And so in some sense, there's this moment where God is it seems as if he's giving up again. And he says, "That's it. I'm going to start over, and I'm going to start over with you, Moses." And then Moses responds, and the text there, it says that when God was upset, Moses sought the favor of the Lord, and he said, "Why should your anger burn against the people whom you brought out of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand?" And I thought it was just interesting that here we have, so many times throughout Scripture, there's this call of God to His people to remember their story, remember the ways that God had delivered them, so that they can have compassion toward others. And here you have Moses telling God, remember your story, remember how you brought them out of Egypt, and with great power and a mighty hand. And why should that story be twisted into a story of anger and death? Let's redeem this. And so he seeks the favor of the Lord. And so I think the first thought and reflection that we might have this morning is, and as we read Scripture, it's always important to ask, what does this reveal to us about God? What does this reveal to us about ourselves and as humanity? And I think the first thing we can recognize is that in verse 13 and 14, where Moses says, "Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, to whom you swore by your own self, I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give your descendants all this land I promised them, and it will be their inheritance forever." And then the Lord relented and did not bring on his people the disaster he had threatened. As we think about and consider how this reveals God to us, I think we can first see that God responds to pleas of mercy. And that God is a God who is immanent, who is with us, who is willing to engage in relationship with humanity and to respond to pleas of mercy, and that He is not indifferent to people crying out to Him and asking for a response of mercy. So along those lines, a resource to share with you guys today, and some of you may have it already, but it's worth sharing regardless. There's a great book along these lines that discusses stuff like this. It's called The God Who Trusts, written by W.M. Curtis Holtzman. And you all know Curtis well. And he explores this idea of the fact that God is one who is willing to be affected by the human story, by the human ways in which we cry out to the divine. So I would check that out. It's a pretty cool book. And Curtis is great because he always says, "I don't care if you buy the book, just read the book." And as one advocating on behalf of Curtis, I don't care if you read it, just buy it to support him. But no, do read it. It's got some really cool stuff. So that's one for you guys. So the second that I thought was really interesting, first, we see that God responds to pleas of mercy. And then if you look at, what happens, there's in verse 20, there's like this really kind of like gnarly response of Moses. He says he took the calf the people had made, he burned it in the fire, and then he ground it to powder, this sort of golden powder, I guess, and he scatters it on the water, and he made the Israelites drink it. And there's this like kind of brutal response of Moses, and you think about what it must have been like to be one of the Israelites who had gone through such an amazing ordeal of being delivered out of Egypt, and yet then they found themselves in the wilderness and were scrounging for food. They didn't know, they had to rely each day for God to rain down manna from heaven, and so they're in this like incredible season of challenge and wilderness, and they're not sure how they're going to be protected, provided for, etc. And so they look to something else for hope. They look to this golden calf, and because Moses had left them, he had gone away, and they were waiting. He hadn't come back yet, and so there's this thought that, okay, like Moses led us out of that situation on behalf of Yahweh. And but now Moses is gone, and we need something else. And so here's this golden calf. And then so then Moses comes back, and he gets upset and like, oh geez, all right, I'm sorry, our bad, welcome back, sort of a thing. And but then the response is this vicious, he destroys everything. And remember, that was kind of like their loot, right? When they're leaving Egypt, they had plundered, if you will, the gold and the treasures from the Egyptians. And then they go out, and to create the golden calf, Aaron says, go get this jewelry, and bring it to me. And then what Moses does is he takes that and he destroys this symbol of God, of hope that they might have in this calf, and he destroys it, grinds it down to a powder, and he says, now drink this, and basically like obliterates their resources, obliterates what hope they had in this other. So I think it's fair to say that might have seemed like this is not a great situation right now. We don't enjoy what's happening here. Moses, is gone for a while, and then we're trying to figure out how to, have some hope. And now Moses comes back, and he destroys this and makes us drink this. Like, this is not an enjoyable moment for us. And yet, if you remember verses 9 and 10, God says, I've seen these people. They're stiff-necked people. Leave me alone so that my anger may burn against them and that I may destroy them. And I think it's this moment where you realize, like, yeah, the drinking of like gold powder, probably not ideal. And at the same time, Moses had come back and advocated on behalf of these people, and through his pleas of mercy, got God to not destroy them. There's this quote from Cormac McCarthy. He says, you never know what worse luck your bad luck has saved you from. And I think it's an interesting thing for us, we really, we never know what worse luck our bad luck has saved us from. And in the story of the Israelites here, like, it's so easy to look at the drinking gold powder and this, the destroying of the hope they had in this golden calf, and think to themselves, like, this is terrible. How could this be, and yet they don't realize that bigger picture. They don't realize that that Moses had in fact saved them from complete and total annihilation from God. And so I think it's something just to consider, that especially in the midst of a situation right now, we, just earlier on this Zoom call, we talked about the wilderness, being in the wilderness of quarantine and pandemic, and not knowing what sort of structures of support are there for us. So we're in this season of wilderness, and we're not knowing really like what our support structures look like, how to pursue hope sometimes, and yet I think this recognition that we don't know the whole story. And I don't believe that God is, inflicting pandemic upon the world, because I don't believe that. I think God is the one who weeps with those who weeps, mourns with those who mourns, and the one who sees a situation like this and is sad and brokenhearted and weeping alongside us. And yet I think there's this recognition that we don't know the whole story. We don't know what worse luck this bad luck may be saving us from. And so in light of this idea that God responds to pleas of mercy, and this idea that we don't know the whole story with our situation of life, good or bad, but especially right now in the midst of the pandemic, my thought was that today may we come before God with humility, of not knowing everything, and also with pleas of mercy for trusting in his goodness, that he is one who longs to um, display his glory through grace, through mercy, and through moving toward healing. So may we do that today. Um, and also the prayer calendar we're following as a church. Today we're encouraged to pray that the church's countercultural, sacrificial love will lead to more people giving their lives to Christ, that everyone will know that we are Christ's disciples by how well we love others. And I think it's exciting to see how well so many of you and people in the church are really loving well in the midst of a season of challenge. So may we love with courage, with creativity, and responsibility as well. Amen. Amen.